And tweeting about it. All right. Now I need to get all my windows in order. Okay. Thanks for joining us once again. I'm Sammy K. Powers, and this is the PHP Roundtable. This is a live podcast of developers discussing topics that PHP nerds care about. And the ultimate goal of this little podcast is to learn a little something from each other. If you're listening live and want to be a part of this episode, send a tweet to PHP Roundtable with a question, and we'll try to get your question answered live if we can. There's lots of great changes coming down the pipe for PHP 7, and there's been a lot of activity on the side of HHVM as well. So today we're going to be diving into what's been going on with PHP internals and hopefully even HHVM internals. We're missing one key person for that so far, but hopefully she'll join us a little bit later. But let's kick it off with these lovely people we have joining us. First, we've got, in no particular order, Julien Pauli, who is a PHP 5.5 and 5.6 release manager and all-around internals contributor. Welcome, Julian.
Yes, hello, welcome. Thank you.
Also, Sara Golemon will hopefully, if she's able to join us, will be popping in a little bit later, and we will intro her once if she pops in, and she'll be talking HHVM stuff. Otherwise, it'll be a non-HHVM episode. Also joining us, Bob Weinand. I hope I'm saying that right. Right?
Weinand.
Weinand. Awesome. Internals contributor who works on the debugger and engine for PHP. Welcome, Bob.
Yeah.
Or I should say, herzlich willkommen. I'll try some German. And also Nikita Popov, internals contributor who works on PHP-NG, which is the technical basis of PHP 7. Welcome, Nikita.
Hey. Sorry, there is no picture.
That's okay. No worries. The people listening in their car won't notice the difference. So let's kick things off with just maybe a quick story from each of you, how you got involved with contributing to PHP internals. Maybe we'll kick it off with Nikita.
Hard question. It's been a while. So I think the first major contribution I did to PHP was the implementation of generators and coroutines.
Oh.
That's in PHP 5.5. I don't know how many years ago that was. So basically I was just researching PHP internals around the time. Like I was interested in how some data structures are implemented, like the set values and arrays. And from looking around the code, I started sending a few small batches and then doing some larger ROCs. And the first one is, I think, the generators.
And at the time, were you really into coding in C or PHP, either one of those, or?
I was writing PHP. I had some C knowledge, but a few years out of date, I'd say. Haven't really done much C work before that. But, well, C is a simple language. It's not C++, so that's fine.
True that. What about you, Julian? How'd you get involved?
Oh, I even don't remember that, but I've been PHP user for more than 10 years here now, and in my studies I studied electronic system and microprocessors and assemblers and very, very low languages, and I wanted to try to merge those two concepts of, yes, I'm a web developer, but in my roots, I'm not a web developer, I'm a system developer. I had no really professional experience back, that I just took PHP as being an open source language I really enjoyed developing with for 10 years and more, and then I dove into internals and I read source code, and as I knew C, it's not really complicated, and so that's how I got involved in the project.
So you said, you and Nikita both said that C is not very complicated in comparing it to C++, for example. What What makes it not so complicated versus other languages?
Nikita said that, so I guess you're asking Nikita?
Well, it's were you alluding to C not being very complicated for you?
No. No,
Oh,
no, it's not.
so
Ma
maybe it's
hardware and machines are complicated,
right.
and compilers are complicated, and the code they generate is complicated, but not the high-level language that C is.
Yeah, I've been trying to dive more into C and C++, mainly C++, and I'm trying to wrap my head around some of these hardware constraints, and it's there's a lot to that. Knowing which core and threading and all this stuff, that's just there's a lot to it. So it's a journey though.
So mainly C is simple in the sense of the language being simple. Like C is a pretty small language, unlike PHP and unlike especially C++, which is like really huge, a lot of features. I think most professional C++ developers never use more than like maybe 10% of it. And compared to that, C is very small, and you can, I know, learn it pretty quickly, but taking enough care to not introduce any memory leaks or use after free vulnerabilities and so on, that's the complicated part.
Right, for sure. Yeah, Bob, actually, we haven't gotten to you yet on how you got started with PHP contributions to the internals.
It's been a few years, say, 5 years ago, or 6, say, when I began with PHP, and sometime I wanted to learn C. And and the way I got into then that was a few teachers, and then I looked at the C source code of PHP, and sometime I began doing minor patches, and yeah, I did the first larger thing I did was Anthony's constant expressions, the constant scalar expressions, and then I got all all access to contribute, and the same year was I started with the PHP debugger. Yeah.
Yeah, that seems complicated. So you started off with small contributions, and then it got more complicated and more involved, and now you're doing things as complicated as a debugger. That's insane. Those are not small contributions when you're talking about debugging and things like that.
Not that many small contributions, but that RFT was a large contribution, and then I got my access to do everything.
Yeah, you have a lot of access. You were the one who merged the changes, some recent changes that I was working on too. So and then you fixed my Git mess. I did a lot of weird things with committing, and I was trying to squash them, and I did a bunch of messed up things, and you went in there and fixed it all. So thanks for doing that. So that's cool to hear your all story about how you got involved. It's always nice to kind of put a face to some of the contributions that have been added to PHP, because we use these things all the time in our normal PHP scripts, and we don't even really think about too much about like, oh, I know it was so and so who added this feature, so and so who added this feature, and it makes it a little bit more personal when you're able to do that while you're coding. I wanted to kind of look at a couple of new features that are coming down the pipe for PHP 7. And some of these have been in PHP 7 for a while now, but I actually wanted to kick it off with some new ways of handling exceptions or exceptions in the actual core engine. Julian or Nikita, actually, either of you, I think it's actually Nikita. You were doing some work on on this specifically, weren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was it that you were doing to switch up how the core of PHP handles or throws errors and exceptions, or raises errors and throws exceptions?
So I first tried to get this through already for PHP 5.6, but well, people weren't really fond of the backwards compatibility breakage at the time, so it got delayed a bit. So basically the idea is that fatal errors are now converted to exceptions, or at least a large part of them, and the technical side of that is actually really simple. It's very easy to convert a fatal error into an exception, much easier than converting it into a catchable fatal error. Well, so really not a large problem, but there is a lot of them. So you have to convert this in like maybe 200 places, so it's just a lot of code churn, and it gets stale very quickly. And yeah, but from the technical side, not particularly interesting. So that was the main change, and then someone else, Bob, do you know the name? So who did the hierarchy changes?
What changes?
The exception hierarchy. So the error.
I don't know.
Well, anyway, that's someone else worked on introducing a new throwable interface. So exception is no longer the base exception class. There is now an interface above it. And these new exceptions which are thrown by the engine are not actual exceptions. They are error exceptions. So there is a new class called error, and it's not part of the usual exception hierarchy. It's separate. And we did this to avoid backwards compatibility breaks with what we call Pokemon exception handlers. So you got to catch them all. If people write catch exception in the code, we don't really want them to catch fatal errors. And that's why we have a separate, why we have kept these new exception types separate from the old ones.
So quite a bit has changed, because in the current versions of PHP 5, we have this kind of base exception. It's just called exception, right? And you can catch all the exceptions through this base exception. But now this exception is kind of it's still there in 7, but it's just kind of reserved for userland, basically. And the core engine now has a number of exceptions that don't extend from this exception, but they all implement the throwable interface. Is that right?
Yeah, it's basically right, but just one correction. The new exception types are not reserved for the engine. They are usable for normal userland code as well.
Okay.
The idea is basically that an error means the programmer did something wrong. And exception means there is some runtime environment condition that wasn't satisfied. So can't connect to a database means exception, but you have a path error means error. So that's basically the distinction, whether it's a programmer error or whether it's an environment error.
Gotcha. Well, I'd like to actually look at just a few of these new exceptions in PHP 7 and kind of get your thoughts on some of these. You already mentioned the error, which is kind of, I believe it was, like at one time it was called like base error or base exception, right? Before it became error. So, but that is the base one that you said that's a programmer error.
Yeah.
There's also a rhythmic error. So that would be anything that has to do with math, I'm assuming?
Yes, I think it's used for something like doing a shift by a negative number, or dividing, doing a modulus by 0.
Oh yeah.
Maybe. Or I think there is a separate one actually for that.
Division by 0. Division by 0
okay,
error.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, by the way, that one actually seems extremely specific. An entire exception for this one thing. Why is that one so specific? Division by 0 error exception. What was? I think that was actually Andrea Fold's I think that's how you say her last name. Contribution. Do you know why there's such a specific exception name?
I don't know.
No idea. You should ask her.
Yeah, she would be a
That's
great one to have
PHP,
on.
that's people bringing ideas. Now we have RFCs, we have votes and things like that, but that stays an open source language and with some kind of lack of consistency inside everything, but she just added this, and I think that should not be an open gate for adding exceptions everywhere. I wasn't really happy when those exceptions popped in PHP. I'm okay for having a base exception, but if we start having I'm a Java exception, I'm an IO exception, I'm a stream exception, extending exception, and things like that, like Java exceptions hell. I don't want to see that in PHP, so I think we have to be careful about these facts.
Right.
But I think in PHP it's already worse. So the SPL exceptions, this runtime and logic exception split, it's like really bad.
SPL must absolutely be given love in the future PHP versions. We all know SPL is it's Marcus code. It's a guy who contributed back in 2002. If I remember, or 2003, more than 10 years ago, and when PHP was just no votes and you do whatever you want, and you can contribute, so you contribute. Now it's a little bit different, but we have a big legacy code like SPL, like far extension, and that are not really 2015 ready. You know, they are pretty old things, and yes, SPL should be given love in next PHP version.
So you're saying the next major one, so PHP 8?
I don't know. I think yes, because we can't break, because we're gonna break. We can't break that. That's a pity. That's why I think we still lack consistency. We have pretty new features. We have nice things. We now have exceptions and things like that. But no one touched SPL in PHP 7. No one added things. No one removed things. No one thought about consistency. And then that's PHP, you know.
Right. But it actually kind of goes to show that, like, you know, if you want a feature in PHP, the person to add it is you, right? Like the person who thinks of the feature. It's you can't really rely on a bunch of people to be like, oh, I'll just wait for the internals people to do it. Like, I want to make sure that Nikita will add this, or let's get Bob or Julian to add this feature. It's like, no, like get in there and start hacking away, and that's what I did too. That's how I don't consider myself an internals contributor, but I just did what it, you know, to just dove right in and try to break things. So that's the best way to learn. I actually do. Before we move on from the exception stuff, there's one in particular that I wanted to ask you guys about, and that's type error. And this is new specifically because I believe it was added to enforce some of the new type hinting stuff, the scalar type hinting. So if you have a function that's expecting an int and you send it a string, for example, it would throw a type error. Is that correct?
That's correct. So that's correct, but it's also used in other situations, and because of that, it's a bit of a misnomer. For example, if you call an internal function and don't pass it enough arguments, then that's going to be a type error as well, even though it has nothing to do with types.
That's exactly what my question was going to be.
Okay.
Because that was something that Anthony Ferrara had proposed in the RFC to change the random int and random bytes functions, that they would throw a type error when the parsing parameters would fail. So that was that. I'm glad you said that it's a misnomer. So I think it's just the name just kind of implies that it's only for types, but it's basically for argument parsing as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's a bit of weird because it's used both for arguments and for return values as well. So we can't really call it an argument error because then it would be weird for return type mismatches. So we just haven't found the right name, I think.
Right. Well, speaking of where this question came from about the type error being thrown when the argument list doesn't match up, that was a change that happened in release candidate 3 of PHP 7, where there was a breaking change with the way that the random functions were throwing. So the new random functions, random int and random bytes, are to generate cryptographically secure pseudo-random numbers or in random bytes. So they're used in cryptographic context. So in RC3, those actually changed the way that they handle some errors. Before, they would just throw a warning and return false, but somebody had pointed out that that's actually a really bad idea within a cryptographic context because you could potentially just run a for loop around these and generate a password of null bytes, basically. So what that process, there was a lot of back and forth between release managers and internals people about, like, oh, should we change it? But it's going to break. We're already on release candidate 2. Like, how are we going to break it? Like, what was that process like, and why was there so much back and forth on that?
Well, I'm not PHP 7 release manager, and I don't want to be. You should, because of that, and you should ask Anatol about this. Mainly, the release manager is responsible of saying yes or no, and we have some rules. Ideally, we should not break things in release candidates, but the past has always showed that we can't have a line and just walk on that line and don't try to step right or left and having things like that. Hi, Sarah. So I think it's PHP I always say that PHP is a trade-off, and the language itself and the code inside itself. So some people manage to push things at the very last second, and some others don't. That's how it works, actually.
I thought the way they handled it was really good. The release manager, Anatol, and Kale, or Kale, I can't remember. Yeah. I think it's Kale. They were on the release management episode a couple episodes back. But they realized this is a breaking change, but it's important for security to change it. So they actually went through the process of saying, okay, create an RFC for this, go through voting, let's see if the community actually wants this. I think Kale officially voted no against it, but there's a lot of yeses. So it was like they had the release managers on record saying, okay, we were trying to do the right thing here. If you guys want to change it still, it's all you. So I think they did a really great job of handling that situation and ended up being great for security. So yeah, that's good. And we're joined by Sara Golemon. Welcome, Sara.
Yeah, sorry I'm late. I was held up by something
pressing. It is
something I can't talk about on a podcast.
It's all good. I think we can all relate to this kind of thing, as in certain industries, especially. Sara Golemon actually wrote the books. Literally wrote the book on extensions in PHP, and is I've been calling you the driving force behind HHVM at Facebook. I don't know if that's officially correct or not, but I'm just throwing that out there. I didn't ask for your one-liner intro beforehand, so I'm making one on the fly for you.
Well, I don't want to take too much credit for HHVM. I think it's okay to call me a driving force behind getting it out beyond Facebook's borders. But there's some really smart people who are actually driving, making it pretty awesome. And I'm glad you corrected that books to book. It's just singular. I haven't gotten a second edition out yet, 9 years later.
But the book that you have out right now is still actually pretty valid, right? Like, you can still use it to create extensions in PHP.
Yeah, I mean, it was written for 5.2, which is pretty far back, but the basic sort of core principles of here's how PHP works, here's how its memory model works, here's how you create a module entry, those things are like in the 95% still completely valid area. The examples aren't going to compile out of the box most of the time because of little tiny changes in the API, but hopefully those are small enough and the error is obvious enough from context that you can figure it out.
Yeah, there's a lot of little subtle things that change, especially when the jump to 7.
Well, yeah. So there's small, tiny things up to 5.6. At 7, it's a little bit bigger because that z-val changes, and that change to the z-val is gonna hang a lot of people up as we actually see 7 actually take off, and people have their sort of internal extensions. I think about Yahoo, because I spent 4 years at Yahoo as well, and Yahoo obviously has a very big PHP install, and they have all of this huge library of custom extensions, and every single one of those is going to have to be migrated and recompiled. And God, I remember I had a hard time just getting some of those compiled at the time, just because they were based on institutional knowledge that somebody else had, and finding it was difficult. So, hey, now's a great time to convince them to use HHVM, isn't it?
Well, you mentioned the z-val changing. Now, just for those who aren't familiar with internal, z-val basically is the internal's way of representing variables from userland, right?
Yes.
Is the sum of that. What specifically changed in internals for the z-val in PHP 7?
So there's several things changed. Like I think like Nikita and I, or probably pretty much anyone on this podcast, we're going to think about changes like, reference counting is now happening in the value, and these struct changes, and there's alignments and byte sizes and things like that. Honestly, for extension developers, we have all these macros and things that make it really well integrated. The thing that's going to catch most people up is the fact that we've gone from one level of indirection, so you have a z-val star, that's a pointer to a z-val, down to 0 levels of indirection. You have just an immediate z-val. That one little change is going to catch, I think, most extension developers off guard the most. For all the rest of it, you just have, z, l val, p, or you've got, obj handler, something like that. You've got macros to abstract all this stuff for you, and it all just kind of happens magically.
Well, Julian, you were kind of laughing there, or like I saw you not laughing, but it looked like you had something to say on the z-val changes, because you recently wrote a blog about this, I believe. Some stuff like this.
No, Nikita posted a blog post about z-val changes, but it's quite old, if I remember. I myself finished my job and finished compiling my extensions and porting them to PHP 7 before starting hard blog posts. I was laughing about Sara because she's always the same. I love her. She talks. Yes, basically, it's not that easy to. It depends on the extension. The extension I'm myself working on for my company are very, very deep Zen extensions like OPKH or things like that, and the changes are absolutely awful. I have to rewrite all my code, but hopefully it's not the case for most extensions. But yes, the z-val trick will bite many people, I think.
I'll tell you, I think about xdebug when I think about difficult migrations, because I know Derek has still working his way through that, because xdebug digs in so deep and so hard. Like if I were him, I would probably just start writing a brand new xdebug from scratch rather than try to make this thing work everywhere.
But I think Derek's problem is that he wants to support all PHP versions in one code base. And supporting PHP 5 and PHP 7 in one code base is pretty hard, especially for an extension like that.
He is perhaps watching, but yes, I told him, just like this, I wrote this to him. I myself restarted all my extensions on a new code base for PHP 7 because it's not possible to support from 5.2 or things like that to 7 in the same code base. There are too many breaks in PHP 7 internal API to do that, or on very complex code bases like xdebug is and every very complex extension.
I'm glad you added that caveat, because I did want to just throw in, not to scare people off, probably the 80% case of extensions, you can support 5 and 7 decently cleanly. You're probably going to have a few portability defines here and there, but it's not out of reach to support 5 and 7 across most extensions. It's just the xdebugs, the run kits, the all of your extensions apparently.
I do want to make a shout out on Twitter really quickly here for Thomas Zutuborski. I'm slaughtering the name, sorry, but he says, "Hey guys, I'm a pretty young guy and pretty young developer myself. Thank you for the work you're putting into PHP development." So that was to a thank you to the people that are joining us here, and also Piha on Twitter. PHP Piha. He's very active in the PHP room. Just posted a screenshot with an arrow pointing to Nikita and saying, "Still no proof. Nikita is a person instead of some genius." I'll run some server
yeah, so
somewhere.
There is a conspiracy theory that actually I am Anthony.
It's basically thinking you're some AI server. The theory. So actually, I wanted to take a look at some of the new features in 7s in PHP 7 and see transition a little bit into HHVM and talk about how these features are being adopted and some changes that are actually coming down the pipe for HHVM. It's interesting that when you talk about PHP 7 new features, I think the two big ones that come up off the top of everyone's head are the new scalar type hints and the null coalesce operator. Which it's funny because those we can talk about each of those, but is that kind of, do you guys kind of get the same vibe like when people talk about PHP 7 features that's like those two kind of pop up all the time?
Well, it's really funny to hear you mention null coalesce because it doesn't. I feel like it doesn't get a lot of press, but that's exactly the one that I just mentioned when we were at Pacific Northwest doing a certain other podcast. I won't mention the name. Town Hall. That is actually, like, to me, the most PHP thing that's coming in 7 because, like, that's the pattern you follow when you write your first PHP script, right? You do $x equals $_get x. Oh, if set $_get x, then $_get x. Otherwise, something else. Like, you follow that pattern from your first script, and like the null coalesce operator sort of says, "Oh, yeah, this is a common pattern. Let's make that easy." Like, if anything is so perfectly PHP, it's that to me. So I 100% agree with that. My opinions on type hints, I think, should be obvious.
Now the type hints thing was it was a bit of a back and forth with internals to get that implemented, and I think it was more of it wasn't necessarily an issue on like should we implement scalar type hints, but should we do it the way that it was suggested to be implemented, right? Was that the main kind of point of contention?
I'm giving somebody else a chance to answer before I speak. But okay, nobody's saying anything. So yeah, I mean, scalar type hints has been an argument in the PHP circles for years, like before HHVM ever showed up with its hackling or whatever. Like, this is something that we've been talking about. Hey, wouldn't it be nice if we had some way to take these nice array and class hints and apply them to scalars? Oh, but do we make them strict or coercive? That's been the crux question that nobody can quite agree which way we should go, which I think, to me, makes it a good end result that we wound up with what Andrea came up with initially and then later is actually brought over the line, which is, fine, you can't agree whether we're going to be coercive or strict, let's be both. Why not both? So we have this thing that is decided at the caller side. I want to call this all of my APIs strictly or coercively, and we can let PHP be PHP, or we can let PHP be a little bit more like, you know, a strictly typed language, and we can get the best of both worlds. What was the question?
It's just about like what was the point of contention for the scalar types kind of being a back and forth in the internals list.
No, that was the contention.
Yeah.
There was a very large contingency that said PHP should remain what PHP is and treat these things weakly. And if we're going to have these type hints, if you say I take an int and you pass it a numeric string, well, just coerce that thing down to an int, and that's fine. which a lot of others felt sort of missed the point of type hinting. So that's where we got caught up.
And just to kind of clarify for people who aren't familiar with this, the idea was that right now in PHP you can type hint objects and arrays, but you can't type hint like an int or a string, for example. So you couldn't type string before the variable name and then get a string. That's what that was added in PHP 7, and we could go on and on about that, I'm sure, for a long time. I do want to hit up a few other features before we transition into HHVM stuff. Anonymous classes, that's kind of a new one that I think Phil Sturgeon and somebody, I can't remember who else it was, that implemented or pushed that one through. Does anybody, do any of you guys have any thoughts on the anonymous classes, on what's that, how's that changing the way we code or anything like that?
Yeah, so the second person you were looking for is Joe Watkins.
Ah,
He's,
okay.
I think, mainly known for the threading extension for PHP.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
anyway, I think anonymous classes are mainly useful for unit testing. So it saves some of the mocking boilerplate or dummy class boilerplate, whatever.
That's nice. I never even, I didn't think of it in that context, but that makes a lot of sense. Well, that's a cool one. I actually want to talk about the abstract syntax tree layers. This is a new layer added to PHP core, which would I heard about this from Sara Golemon, or not Sara Golemon, sorry, Elizabeth Smith when she came and talked about kind of some of the new changes in PHP 7. So apparently you can do some really crazy things with the new AST layer. And I think Nikita, weren't you the one who added that?
Yeah.
So what is that all about? What does that even mean?
Yeah. So how do I say it? So when PHP executes code, it first compiles it into a form of bytecode. So we call it opcode. It's just like an instruction stream, because it's kind of inconvenient to work directly on source code. We want to have a more low-level representation. And in PHP 5, the compiler used to simply go through the code and directly emit these opcodes. And this had like certain restrictions. For example, they have to be in the exact same order. So instructions have to be in the exact same order in which the corresponding syntax elements occur. For example, if you think of something like a for loop, the for loop has in the header like this code you run before the loop condition, and the code you run after the loop. So you know what I mean? And if you compile this directly, you have to compile the code that runs after the loop before the loop body. And you have to insert like a bunch of jumps to get this back into the right order. And so now we have this intermediary level where we convert the source code into a syntax tree. So yeah, just a tree structure which we can use to use for the actual compilation process. Well, I don't know. I think it has very little direct benefit right now. We haven't used it for much, but it can be used for more optimizations and so on. Well,
So
I think Sara
sort of
can explain that better.
Well, no, that's an excellent explanation. I just wanted to kind of add to it by saying that that's sort of the compiler nerd explanation of like, this is how we're actually using it internally in the engine, and this is how it benefits us, because we can make a more consistent engine. We can make an engine that creates more efficient bytecode, and that's great for everybody because PHP runs faster. Yay! But sort of from a user face point of view, I would explain it in terms of, you're familiar with the token get all function. That'll basically tell you all the words in all those words and all the symbols in a piece of source code. So you can say, oh, well, there's an if statement there, or there's an if token, there's an equal token, there's all these tokens, but it doesn't tell you anything about how they fit together or anything about how the language uses them. At the other end of it, you actually can see the bytecodes that come out of PHP already. You can use something like Derek's VLD Vulkan logic decoder to dump them out. I've got an extension called parsekit, which will let you look at these byte codes sort of live in the program. But these are extremely low level. These are just the specific instructions of like, okay, is this variable 0? Okay, if so, jump to that address. Otherwise, continue on. Or assign this thing to that, but without really giving any context for what's going on. It's a bit too low level. The AST sits between those two, and the AST gives you a picture of like, okay, what's going on in this program? Well, we've got a list of statements. What's one of those statements? Well, the first statement is, let's assign a value to a variable. Here's the name of the variable. Here's the thing that we're assigning to it. Oh, the thing we're assigning to it is in turn an expression of adding one thing to another, something like that. So it's this tree, AST, tree, of different expressions that lead down to statements which take actions. And it turns out you can also look at these trees. Nikita's got an extension for that. I forget the name, but I've also got a couple. There's AST view for just dumping out the current AST in a very dumb block format, and AST kit for exploring it as a series of objects. And uses for this, well, outside of the engine, you could potentially use this for something like a static analyzer. Let's say you want to write a program that looks at PHP scripts and says, hey, are you vulnerable, or are you at least potentially vulnerable to uniform variable syntax changes in PHP 7? Here's lines you want to look at, because I've looked at this abstract syntax tree and said, here's a pattern I recognize. Here's something we can do something with that. Within the engine, as Nikita said, we can make optimizations. We can look at things like, hey, this variable that we're adding to another variable, well, we actually know what the values of those variables are, because we can do static analysis, sort of going back in time and seeing that $x is always equal to 3, because it was set once and never changed. And oh, look, $A is either going to be 1 or 2, depending on the if condition. So we can make some optimizations based on that. We have only scraped the sort of the uppermost layers of what those optimizations can potentially be. And I think we'll see those come out in 7.1, 7.2, and onward. We'll see PHP get faster and faster.
Yeah, so there are some initial plans to get control flow analysis into PHP 7.1 and maybe some basic SSA implementation, so for static single assignment. So I just wanted to add, you can, in PHP 7, dump the bytecode using PHP debug, I mean. It's directly supported, no longer need an extra extension. And there is also a first static analyzer based on the internal parser that's, I don't know how to pronounce it, but PHAN, P-H-A-N, by Rasmus Lerdorf. So for example application.
Elizabeth Smith actually described the AST layer as allowing you to do evil things, like adding full hack support, which is the language that runs, or that HHVM runs, to PHP by just installing an extension and tying into the AST layer. I think that's what she was saying, if I remember correctly. And I don't know if that's necessarily a... she did say evil. I do remember her saying it was evil, so I don't know if it's the best way to do it, and maybe that's why it was evil. But but it sounds like it really opens up the door.
Yeah, potentially you could do something like that. There is a hook in the engine called AST process, I think is what it got called. Basically, after your script is parsed and turned into an AST, an extension could mutate that AST into something else before it actually reaches the engine. The intention of that was to allow optimizers to go in and do those sorts of things where they improve the tree. But potentially you could do something like redefine large parts of the language. It's a little bit tricky because you can't change the core grammar, but yeah, there's potential for evil there. Elizabeth likes to be evil. That's her thing. She uses Windows, so that's not surprising.
Well, there's lots of other features that I had on the list that we could talk about. I do want to get to HHVM stuff before we get too far onto time, but I did want to mention at least that there's the new context-sensitive lexer, combined comparison spaceship operator, which is that little spaceship. I don't know. It's a cute one. Uniform variable syntax and You can also group use declarations at the top of your scripts. So like lots of cool little features like that. Before we hop into the HHVM stuff, is there anything interesting coming down, or at least being discussed for PHP 7.1 that you guys know about?
Now, let me check the list.
Yes, I think Nikki and Bob have some ideas about PHP 7.1. We already have RFCs, haven't we? Targeting 7.1, I think. I don't really know much.
I'm sure there are RFCs up. Like, I know I've seen some stuff fly across the list. I don't think anybody's actually coding to 5.1 yet, because we haven't done the branch cut, have we?
Well, yes, we have.
Oh,
so
yeah.
There is
Okay.
a PHP 7 branch, so master is now 7.1.
Yeah, master. Yeah.
Really? Oh.
So I'm looking at the list. So some of the new features that might go into 7.1 is nullable types. So nullable return types. It's well, rather significant limitation right now. And maybe annotations. So I think that's a very desired feature in PHP, but we kind of never agreed on how exactly it's supposed to work. And there is some interest in improving the situation for asynchronous I/O. So we have some basic support for this in the form of coroutines, but it's like kind of a hack, and we might be able to improve on it. Yeah, so that's 3 possible topics to look into.
All stuff that's already in Hack.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I saw recently there was a shorthand syntax for lambdas or for what are we calling it in PHP? Closures?
They're closures at the end of the day, but they're referred to as short lambdas. It's
short lambdas. Okay,
yeah.
We'll say that. Is the short lambda syntax was different than HHVM's short lambda syntax, I believe, by one character. There was this one was proposing using a tilde versus it was proposing using a hyphen versus a tilde. I can't remember exactly which one it was.
It's the tilde greater than, or as some people call it, the spermatozoa operator.
Nice. So is that that one? I don't think passed, right? So it was withdrawn. Has there been any features that were implemented that exist in HHVM but were implemented kind of with a one character change, or just some incompatibility like that so far, or was that going to be?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think one important thing here is to make a distinction between HHVM and Hack. HHVM is the runtime. Hack is the alternate language, and we do our best to do all these divergences from PHP solely in Hack. So you only get these features in the less than $HH mode. In less than $PHP mode, it's just PHP as PHP is supposed to be. So if PHP implements things a little bit differently, there's still room for our runtimes to not diverge at all. You just have, this is your behavior in PHP mode, this is your behavior in Hack mode. So it's not necessarily a problem when PHP does something a little bit different than Hack is already doing it. It's just slightly annoying is all.
But there are also some real discrepancies between PHP and the HHVM runtime, so not just Hack. I think the biggest one I'm aware of is the different generator implementation, which makes it, I think code using generators for async I/O is completely incompatible with HHVM.
We're going to fix that. I know your pull request has been up for a glacial period of time, and I'm sorry. I am really, really sorry.
Yeah, I know.
It's not going to die there. It's just there are things in the way, but we will fix that. And I'm sorry that it's sat there so long.
It's fine.
Well, I was actually going to ask how PHP 7 features are ported over to HHVM. Like, who's responsible for getting those over there, and like, what does that look like for you on your side, Sarah?
Well, as it happens, we're actually doing a press to get all of the last remaining ones out right now. Generally speaking, like as new features come up, I'm aware of what's going on because I'm looking at the internals list. So I'll be like, oh, hey, why don't I just get that implemented right now, and I'll get it taken care of. And so you'll see that in the next HHVM release, which will come out in every 8 weeks or whatever we have. And there might be a few changes, but we'll catch up to PHP as it goes. PHP 7 has introduced a lot of things, and not all of them are trivial. So a few things have sort of sat on the back burner, and with PHP 7.0 final about to come out, we're saying, well, what's sitting on that back burner? All right, everybody, into a room, let's get this done, so that when 7.0 comes out, we can say, yeah, everything's cool, you can run your stuff on whatever runtime. So at the moment, everybody's working on that. Well, everybody on my team anyway, which is like 4 people.
Nice.
And I think it's worth mentioning that HHVM is implementing the backwards incompatible features as well, but they provide INI settings, so configuration settings, to turn these on or off. So
thank you for mentioning that.
I think it's like pretty hard on the implementation sometimes, but it's probably very nice for the user.
Well, that's the goal of that is making it as easy for the user as possible. And as you mentioned, like even uniform variable syntax, which is a parser change.
It looked really ugly.
It is really ugly, and I sit right next to the guy who wrote that, and there were a number of 4-letter words involved as he was trying to address. Well, 4-letter words. Flex is 4 letters. But yeah, that was quite interesting. But we're doing our best to make sure that nobody gets left on a PHP 5 island feeling like they can't upgrade to anything else. If they can upgrade to PHP 7, great. If they can upgrade to HHVM, great.
I do want to ask you, Sarah, about one specific implementation that is coming down the pipe in HHVM. I wanted to back up really quickly because I just realized that we hadn't, at the beginning, we never kind of clarified that PHP is actually written in C, and HHVM is written in C++. So if you're interested in getting diving into internals, you'll want to dust off those old C and C++ books from college and kind of look into that. But I wanted to kind of, we talked about exceptions before you got here and how they're kind of new in PHP 7, like how the core the engine is throwing exceptions, and right now in PHP in the source code you can use this function called zen parse parameters to parse the arguments of a function, for example, and if it does all the magic, and if there's an error, it'll raise an error, or it'll actually raise a warning. But there's a new one that was added in 7, which is zen parse parameters throw, which will actually throw a type error exception if the arguments are of not the right type, or not the right amount, or all that stuff. Now in HHVM, I noticed that all that happens sort of automatically. There's not I didn't see. I'm working on porting over my feature over to HHVM, and I don't see any. There's no kind of parse parameters function. It just seems to be like you get your arguments right there. So I'm curious how it's like a selfish, because I want to figure it out for my own function, because it's supposed to throw a type error when you get the arguments wrong. How is that feature going to be implemented where it can throw a type error when the arguments parsing fails?
This might have been implemented already. I'm not sure. I'll have to double check. But the short answer to that is, as you say, yes. Like the parameter parsing and coercing all sort of happens in this magic middle layer. You have your PHP definition for your function where you put all your types, like I expect an int, whatever, and then you get this magical C++ function which just receives all the right types. There's no ZPP involved. Yay! This is something we can do because we're jitting out all of these functions, sort of live, and we just say map this type to that type and do all that sort of thing. One thing that I know already exists is how we handle failures in the PHP 5 sense. So most PHP 5 extensions, if zen parse parameters fails, they will simply return, and this creates an implicit return of a null value. A few of them will say return false because they have different error responses for whatever reason. So the way we have that implemented in HHVM is you can put an annotation on the function in your PHP file that says param coerce mode false, and it will use the false return instead of the null return, which is the default. I believe what we're planning or have already done will be param course mode throw. So if it fails to course, then it throws an exception instead of raising an error and returning null or false. So basically, you'll do the same kind of thing. You'll just do it in a slightly different spot.
Cool. That sounds like fun. I'll make sure to stay on top of watching that, because that's something I'm going to need to work on my little port there. So, by the way, the HHVM team has been really excellent and super nice with helping me port this stuff over, because I don't even know what I'm doing. It's a very cool experience. Contributing to PHP internals, which was fantastic. Like, everybody was there to help. I mean, even you people here we're all part of that. So it's really cool to see that the community will definitely come out and help you if you've been considering contributing to internals, whether PHP or HHVM. Lots of smiling faces there once you arrive. So I know we're running kind of close on time, so I want to hit two selfishly things here, because I've been wanting to think of my next contribution to PHP, and one of them has been submitted already. This is actually in February 2013, and it was by none other than Sara, the trailing comma function args RFC. That was something that I thought I could contribute, but I realized it was already submitted. But basically,
sorry, somebody keeps trying to call into this room.
No worries.
Yeah, the trailing commas. Yeah.
Yeah, so right now with an array, right, you can have trailing commas, you have a big list of stuff, and you can leave a dangling comma there, and no problem, there's no complaints. But with function arguments, and if you have a big list, especially with constructors, when you have a giant list of arguments, if you have a trailing comma, it's no bueno. So, Sara, why did that one get you submitted it a while ago, but it didn't pass? What was up with that?
I have a feeling the reason it failed was just because I didn't make a very good argument for it, to be honest. I see it as kind of a simple no-brainer. It's a consistency thing. As you said, we have it for arrays already. Why shouldn't we have it for function calls or anywhere else? You can have these arbitrarily long comma-separated lists. Sorry, there's people trying to get in this room too. Like I said, I think the main reason it failed was just I did a bad job of arguing for it, and I think if somebody else put the RFC up, we might potentially see it pass. And I'm going to go mute again because I have to find another room. Sorry.
No worries. What about any of Nikita or Julian or Bob? Do you have any thoughts on the trailing comma argument list?
So I think I voted against it at the time it was proposed, but I think if it went up again, that's a definite yes. So just was wrong time. I don't know. I think it's a pretty logical extension, especially now that we have more focus on variadic functions with variable number of arguments. I think it's should be added.
Cool. What do you, Bob or Julian? Do you kind of, are you on the bandwagon or no?
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm trying to fetch the RFC to remember.
Oh yeah, sorry. It's the trailing comma argument list RFC. I had it pulled up just a second ago, but yeah, it's basically allowing you to leave dangling commas at the end of an argument list. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot and will you vote yes? So.
Okay. Oh, just for one little comma.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I see it. Yes, that was written in 2013. Yes.
Yeah.
So
yep.
That was before Variadics, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yes.
I think so.
So like Nikita says, yes. Now today, yes. Why not? Why not? Definitely yes. It's a good idea. It's a good. It's a merge with the variadic arguments ID and the way we can fetch them back, and it's just a little simple change in the engine, I think, because a lot of job has been done with argument parsing and argument passing on the stack to the functions in PHP 7 that has changed a lot. So it's just about syntax. So. Why not? I'm okay for that. It's just a matter of time. That was submitted. PHP, it's like this. You submit an ID. It's a bad idea. Just go away with your ID. And 6 months later, there is someone that pushes nearly the same ID, but the wording is different,
Right.
and the magic happens, and then you get back 6 months later, so that's 1 year later, and you go back with your RFC, like the annotation. I'm sure we're going to have annotation in PHP in the future, and it's like many things, like the argument, the strict typing of arguments we've been talking about. We've been fighting for that for 10 years with an attempt in 5.2 and one more attempt in 5.3 rejected, and just leave the time pass and get some more maturity, and it will be all right, I think, for such IDs.
So I think it's time to maybe submit another one.
Perhaps, yes.
One last thing I did want to talk about before we wrap it up with the developer shout-out is your thoughts, and this is for anybody, on immutability features in PHP. I know Andrea had submitted a read-only properties RFC that was withdrawn for whatever reason. I've been kind of discussing with a couple of people about an idea of immutable class, like having just like a immutable keyword before you create a class, and it just guarantees immutability. Are there any thoughts from you guys on any of those types of features?
Well, I definitely see it as something valuable. I mean, I use it all the time. C++ like loves to hide things behind immutability layers and constants and things like that. I think there's definitely room for it, but I don't think anyone's got a really solid idea on how they want to implement it yet. There's definitely been some attractive-looking ideas. So you mentioned read-only. Just throw that as a keyword in front of a property, and then it's not actually mutable from outside the class. Or maybe some sort of a per property getters and setters have come up a number of times. Did they ever actually make those in? I'm actually not sure. I know I'm not using them in PHP. No, okay, so they haven't made them in yet. But per property getters and setters are one way that we can deal with that as well. I think it's a question of time. I think exactly as Julian said, there are ideas that come up and get shot down for whatever reason, and then 6 months or a year or 6 years later, they come up again, and because the timing is right or because they're presented right, suddenly this is a good idea, and why haven't we done this sooner? It's just time.
And I believe Anthony Ferraro is posting on Twitter asking about if people would be interested in a blog on the evilness of getters and setters or something like that on objects, and maybe with maybe if I copy and paste some snippets from his blog and post it as an RFC, it's just it's the PHP way, copy paste, I'm used to that kind of stuff. So, all right, we'll see about immutability feature. That's kind of a bigger one to tackle. So far I've only just done like a little C wrapper type thing. So let's a little bit at a time. Like Bob said at the beginning, that he started with little contributions and started getting more involved. So that's the idea. And since I know we're running overtime. I mean, this has been a great discussion. There's still tons of stuff to talk about, but it's just we just got to have another one of these. We'll definitely have another one of these when PHP 7 is released stable, and we'll definitely talk about like some fun stuff then. But I do want to move this on to the developer shout out, which is a segment that recognizes amazing developers in the community for their contributions in the PHP community, and they are going to be getting the person who's been nominated for this episode is going to be getting a $50 Amazon gift card and this is sponsored by Laracasts. And if you don't know what Laracast is, it is the Netflix for developers. And if you're listening to the PHP Roundtable because you're trying to learn more about PHP, then you're absolutely going to love Laracast, because it's basically these screencasts of this guy, Jeffrey Way, just showing you step by step how to do some really cool things in PHP. There's a lot of emphasis on Laravel, the web framework, but there's also a lot of stuff on like testing and all this other stuff. So even if you're not a Laravel friend, it's still a great resource. Learn lots. So Laracast is sponsoring this $50 Amazon gift card, and the panel nominated Anatol Belsky, release manager for PHP 7, one of the release managers. So Julian, why did you guys nominate Anatol for this?
Because I wanted to nominate someone who is actually here at this PHP roundtable, but I guess that's forbidden to do. so, yes, someone like Nikita Popov. But Anatole, I'm still a release manager, and Anatole has asked me lots of questions recently about how to manage the community, how to manage the commits. He's a very nice guy. He's always, I met him several times in real life. He's always smiling. He's a good spirit guy, and he's always got the good solution to make everyone smile and everyone happy. So that's why I think, moreover, he's a nice technical developer. He's a nice guy as well, and that's why I just thought about him like this.
That's awesome. Like you said, like everybody at this roundtable here, all four of you totally deserve developer shoutouts for all of your contributions in PHP and the community. And I'm thinking that eventually there'll be an episode where you get the developer shout out for sure. I wish there's a way that we could just like send them out like every day, you know, because there's so many people who do some amazing work in the community. So, Anatole, thank you so much for all your awesomeness that you're doing with the release management stuff. And I'll be contacting you about getting your address and sending you this $50 Amazon gift card. And finally, I'd like to wrap this up with some shameless plugs. Since you're taking some time out of your day to join us at the roundtable, I'd love to give you an opportunity to just plug yourself. Julian, do you have anything that you would like to promote?
No, I have nothing to say more.
You don't have any books you're selling or any kind of services that you want to offer?
Nikita, this is for us. We should write a book for PHP 7 internals, but that's not done. We have no time, so I have nothing to promote actually.
All right, no worries. What about Sarah? Do you have anything you'd like to promote?
I've got nothing for myself personally, but my good friend Owen Yamauchi has recently released his Hackling book from O'Reilly. So if you're interested in Hack, you want to see what you can do with it, go check that out.
Excellent. What about you, Bob? Do you have anything to promote? Do you have any services that you'd like to tell people about, or a book that you're selling, or anything like that?
No.
No, you're good? Okay, cool. Nikita, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'll pass as well.
Wow,
I don't think I have
you guys
anything.
are just selfless, contributors that you don't expect anything in return. Wow, that's just insane.
I actually feel kind of scummy because I'm the one who plugged anything.
Yeah, but you didn't even plug yourself. You plugged your friends, so that's that's even better. Wow. Well, you guys are great. I really enjoy working with you guys, sort of in the open source world, and looking forward to doing some more contributions with you guys. And I'm learning so much for you, and I hope for one day for me to pay it forward and do the same for other people, kind of getting into this stuff. So, if you're listening live, thanks for the Twitter fun. I think there's some people. Wellington, I didn't get to your question. Sorry. Elizabeth Smith chimed in too. She's nodding her head along with us. So some good Twitter activity still that we didn't get to. But our next episode is going to be running a Rockin' user group, and we're going to be talking about what it takes to have a PHP user group that is just amazing. We'll talk to some user group organizers and things like that. Also, an episode coming down the pipe, Design Pattern Mania. That was scheduled, I think, originally for like this week, but we just, with scheduling conflicts, we moved it further back. We've got Adam Wathen, Anthony Ferrara, and Ross Tuck all discussing this like design pattern mania type thing where we're just getting paralyzed by design patterns that we're supposed to be implementing and all this stuff, and try to break that down and make it less sucky. So if you've got something that you'd like to share on the PHP Roundtable, I'd love to hear from you. Just hit me up on Twitter. I'm Sammy K on Twitter, or ping PHP Roundtable. You can also go to phproundtable.com, and there's like a form you can just fill out and just dump your ideas, or say, hey, I want to be on the roundtable, and we'll get you on and talk about whatever you want. So awesome. Let's thank you, Bob and Julian and Nikita and Sarah, for joining us for this PHP Roundtable, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Thank you. Yeah.